Hi, I'm Robert Schramm, a behavior analyst, education specialist, author, and dad. And I am also the developer of the 7 Steps to Instructional Motivation. Each week, I provide you with helpful information based on the Just 7 Steps approach. So if you haven't already subscribed to my YouTube channel, please take a second, do it right now. You'll be glad that you did. It's time for us to get into part 2 of my conversation on motivation with Steve Ward. In part 1, we've established that motivation is a key to education, that there are some mistakes that parents typically make related to motivation, and that Steve is actually younger than I am, even though he was working in behavior analysis before me. I haven't gotten over that last one yet. So without any further ado, let's get into our conversation, part 2 on motivation. I'm going to move on to my next question. I sent you an email. We kind of pre-interviewed a little bit, and you mentioned that you consider there to be some common misconceptions about motivation. And I don't know if you've brought them up or not yet, but what are you focused on making sure that people get right when they're thinking about motivating operations?
Okay, right. One of the first things I already kind of hit on is the assumption that they need to set up the contract, and that if they have set up the contract, then the students responding, if they do go along with you, it will be maintained by positive reinforcement. That is not always true, right? For some of the reasons we discovered. And then some learners also, it will be a little more subtle. They might go along and do the puzzle, or put the dishes in the dishwasher, some kind of a functional chore or something like that. They might do it, and they might accept the phone after they've done it. But the real reason they did the dishwasher was because they knew they had to. that still can be true. And it's a little getting in the weeds trying to describe the differences between what those look like. But it's still true. Some kids that just because we're giving them something when they're done, that doesn't mean the primary reason they were doing it was to get the thing.
Yeah.
Hopefully it means it's pride, but it might, a lot of the time, to be really honest, a lot of the time it's really escape. They're doing it to get it done with, and then they happen to get something afterwards.
Right. So you think you're using positive reinforcement, that you're going to be adding something to the environment that the child is working towards or wanting to have access to. And instead, they're working to just get away from you, to get away from the demand. And so you're using negative reinforcement without even realizing it. Yeah. I talk about that in one of the earlier episodes. We discuss the differences between positive and negative reinforcement, and how dangerous it can be to inadvertently use negative reinforcement on a regular basis through nagging and raising your voice and constantly repeating your instructions over and over again. So
yes, yeah, it can be difficult to be honest with ourselves about it, or to notice it, because if we don't have a deep enough understanding of motivation, then we run a procedure that supposedly accounts for the motivation, but it doesn't necessarily account for the motivation.
You gave him the phone and he played with it afterwards.
Yeah.
So it must have been positive reinforcement. Well, was it?
Yeah, we could talk a lot longer about that, but frankly, a lot of the times it's not really. Yeah. It's like, they went along well enough that they're not going to be less likely to do it in the future. So that's good. We didn't totally lose on it, but I really want to be honest with myself and make everyone on the teams I'm working with be honest with themselves about, okay, this one he's doing it to get it over with. He's in an okay place. He'll get it over with, and he'll still appreciate the phone, but let's not do that too often. Let's not
because you're not increasing your own value. You're just not increasing your own value in those interactions. And that's got to be crucial in everything that we do. We want to make sure that we're not only reinforcing a specific behavior in the moment, but that we're also increasing our value in relationship to that child and the environment, so that they see us as more and more valuable, because we need them to keep coming back and to keep wanting to engage with us. And as a parent, that's even more important, right? You've got to, you want to set yourself up as the attraction in the environment, the giver of good things, like you said earlier. It's really important.
You have them all weekend, right? And you might have them, a lot of hours all the time as the parents. You guys have, you want to be staying on the right foot as much as you can with that. I think another big thing with a misconception about motivation This might tie in pretty well to our discussion about extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation as well.
Well, don't get too into that because I want to go there next.
Okay, cool. I'll put a toe in the pool and then we can jump into it. There is some understanding among some people in the field that if I have Robert do this thing and I don't give him tokens or clicks or points or anything like that, then that means he's doing it for natural reinforcement or for pride or something like that. That's what that means, because he did it and I didn't give him any tokens or points or money or candy or anything. Again, sometimes, just like running that as a procedure, motivation is really not that simple to say, haha, we did it without tokens. That means it's pride. Again, if Robert really did a lot better with tokens than without, when you thought he was working for pride, he could have been working for escape. Really, way more about escape.
Yeah, great.
So again, where they're thinking we're being, what's the word I'm looking for? More idealistic. We're working way up here. We might actually be way down here.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, and that's kind of what I was hoping that the intrinsic versus extrinsic conversation will go. So when we get there, let's broach that again. But absolutely, that's a concern. And the term I always try to use is, the feeling of accomplishment. Is people, okay. we want people to do things because they feel the accomplishment of it. They enjoy the accomplishment of it. Like, I get a hard task done. I look around and I feel good because the room is now clean and I feel good about the effort I put into it. That's what we want our kids to work for. The question is how do we get there? And will we ever get there if we assume that by just yelling at them to clean their room and then they get it done and I didn't have to give them a toy or a game or an activity afterwards, did they naturally, intrinsically want to do it? And obviously, like you're saying, that's not the case. And that's something to be concerned with.
Yeah.
So, just so that I don't get thrown off my plan for today, I did have one topic I wanted to discuss shortly before we get into the intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. And, conditioning itself is kind of a tough word outside of the science of behavior, because the word conditioning immediately kind of leads people towards this idea of conditioning children as it's somehow a different thing that's different than teaching. But regardless of that connotation, there is some value in understanding how to condition new motivators, which can then become new interests for a child. And what are your thoughts on conditioning new interests in children? And can you explain a bit about how you see that being helpful in a program for any growing or developing child?
Sure. I think practically all children could benefit from expanding their interests. Take away our exceptionally interested and curious kids. Let's set them aside applaud them and set them aside for the rest of this talk. But some of our kids, they have a very, very narrow range of interests. Like it's just the iPad and it's Skittles or, a couple of things like that. On the very, very simple sort of behavior analysis 101, we're trying to teach kids, one of the things we want to avoid is satiation, right? So if we're just even working at that level, I don't want to have the chance of you getting satiated on the iPad or satiated on the Skittles. So if I even taught you to appreciate Cheetos as well, then at least I have one other thing to switch to when you're tired of having Skittles, right? That's
everyone's going to get satiated in everything at some point.
Yep.
I mean, you name it, and there's going to be there's a level of it that's too much, or that it loses its value. So the more we have, the better. We know that.
Yeah, exactly right.
So how do we use motivation then to do that? How do we condition or bring up new motivators?
I'd like to add one more part to the last question first, so I don't stop at just the satiation part.
Okay, good. Sorry.
One additional thing. Yeah, no problem. In fact, this kind of leads to your follow-up question anyway. As we're conditioning the new interests, if I had gotten you interested in Cheetos, let's just say, okay, it's Cheetos. At least now there's another word that's relevant for you to say. There's another kind of interaction we might have. There's hand cleaning to be done, right? You've got orange powder on your hands now. So we can be looking at more behaviors that become relevant because we're interacting with more things. Now, especially if I can get out of the domain of talking about edibles and iPads, and let's say now we're going to set up block towers to knock down. Oh, well, now we're really getting rich, right? If I take the time and I don't ask you if you want to work, if you want to do puzzles in order to earn access to the block towers, I just engage you with block towers, show how it works, put you in touch with the big bang, the payoffs of me being distraught that you've knocked it over and all of this stuff. If I can get that going, how many behaviors become relevant now? Right. And I'm not taxing you with challenges on your way to engage with the block towers. We have imitation in there. We have echoing. We have listening. Give me that one. Let's set this up. We have vigilance games. We have conditioning social stimuli as reinforcers. And I should probably stop for a moment because I've been going on a decent sized rant. But that's part of how the conditioning works. And that's part of the expanding the interests. Every new interest can be a new pivot point for other interests. So if we only have two pivot points to start with.
Right. If everything we do is focused off of our interests, and we've got two interests, then there's a limit to the number of things that our kids can be doing. You add a third interest and a fourth interest, and you've just potentially almost doubled the types of behaviors that they may need to or want to engage in, and things that you can continue to start to expand and work on. Yeah, it just makes sense, right? So then that leads us to the next question, if you don't mind, is how do we do that? How do we get those? How does a parent take a child who's only interested in one or two foods and get them interested in other foods, which I guess is a little bit harder. But let's think about it in terms of toys. How do you bring in, how do you make puzzles interesting? Or
let's start from a current interest. So say my kid, a lot of our little guys like some roughhouse stuff. They'd like it when I roar like the lion and scare them a little bit and, rough them up a little bit after that. So let's say they like that. We could very easily have a puzzle that has predators, right? They have lions and tigers and bears puzzles and stuff. So great, let's do that puzzle. And then some of the time on topic, I'm being thematically consistent here. We put in the lion, and then there's attack sometimes. Or I challenge you to get the lion and play a little vigilance game with you, right? Where you might be able to get the lion or you might get attacked before you get it, almost to steal the bacon kind of setup, capture the flag, similar kind of thing. Using one interest and getting the same process to happen with other materials is a big part of it. Now, this has to connect with a shaping versus prompting as well. And this is part of where it's tricky. We can't say, okay, Robert will do the animal predator puzzle and he will like it because he likes roughhousing and lions. So now we're going to prompt and fade our prompt for Robert to do the lion puzzle. And then he's going to like puzzles. Instead, right? What do? We kind of fish. We say, we put one in and we make a noise and we offer the chance to do one and we, scratch his ribs and some stuff like that. We engage a little bit and we watch to see signs of interest. And as we see those signs of interest, it's a bit of a dance. Where's my kid wanting this to go? Can I nudge it this way and that way and show him some more things that are really cool about this without me saying, Robert, put this piece in here now, turning it into just like a discrete trial.
Yeah. But so step one in finding ways to condition or create new motivators is to take current interests and try to expand them. But as you said, there's some dangers in doing that the wrong way.
Our teaching method is critical as well. Let's take another example. This one would probably hold up pretty well. If you liked roughhousing, it might be fairly easy to associate the lion piece going in the puzzle with the roughhousing. That might be fairly easy to do. But to have you practice drawing a lion, that might be a harder one, right? Like you're a gross motor roughhouse guy, and I'm asking you to hold a crayon or a pencil and make marks on a page that look like it. And then I can look at the lion.
Yeah. Just because there's a lion doesn't mean that I'm willing to work for 20 minutes to come up with a lion when I could be getting a lion a lot easier. And the actual thing I like about the lion isn't the lion. It's the scared aspect of our interaction, right?
Exactly right. We have to basically know somewhere in entertainment, they talk about the hook. Like, what's the hook? What gets them on? We have to know what our kid's hook is. And so like, how often do we need to get them in contact with that hook? How many behaviors can we arrange for them to spontaneously engage in that are relevant to that hook?
Mhm.
And what's our shaping size? How much are we expecting before we're throwing the hook back in?
How does that lead us to pairing, the concept of pairing? What about the process of just taking a neutral item or a neutral stimulus and then trying to pair that together with motivating situations, and then seeing if you can build up new interests in new things by pairing them together?
That still has merit as well. There's some questions, some challenges sometimes logistically with that. So if we were talking about, we're going to do some coloring and you already don't mind it, right? You're not opposed to coloring and you definitely like Cheetos and you like music of some kind. I chose music instead of video for the logistical issue.
Right.
If you're watching a video, you're not looking at your page. So it's not a very good thing to pair with coloring, unless we're at a level where you're learning how to color by an instructional video showing you how to color, how to make a dinosaur, right? That would be a separate thing. Otherwise, I have to consider, can you appreciate the through the input channel what the reinforcers are that you already appreciate? Are you able to perceive those while still engaging in the other activity, or at least being exposed to the coloring activity?
And then I think another crux to that, or another important aspect, is the item, like you said, is it not something you hate? Is it a neutral item that you're trying to pair up? If you try to take a really strong motivator and pair it with a really strong aversive, bottom line is you're going to end up somewhere less on both, right? But if you could take something that's pretty neutral, like for a child who's just never done puzzles before, and they don't know what puzzles are, they don't have a negative connotation to puzzles, they don't feel any kind of way about puzzles. And then you introduce puzzles while there's music playing and bubbles flying and the child's, having a good time, and you're dancing around and you're putting the puzzle pieces in. Then there is a reason to think that it's possible to start making that puzzle experience fun enough that the child would say, oh, you know what, actually, now that I've experienced it, I actually like that these things go together this way. And I think it's kind of cool. And they start to get that understanding of the value of a puzzle, because they were willing to experience it due to the other motivators. But yeah, you're right. It's not gonna work if you're trying to get them to clean their room for music.
Right. You're going to get a lot of that teasing bait and switch, carrot on a stick, whatever you want to call it. It's going to come in. Another kind of conditioning that I would be doing a disservice not to bring up is the discriminative stimulus procedures for conditioning new reinforcers. I first learned about this, I know it was from Per Holt at a presentation. I think it was at ABAI probably like 12 years ago.
Just so I know, are we talking about like stimulus pairing?
No, that's what we talked about, like with the bubbles and the candy and the puzzles. That would be more like the stimulus pairing. The discriminative stimulus approach is basically, and I'll try to make this be in the also like parent ease, the green light, right? Let's take the game red light, green light. Perfect example.
Okay.
In the game red light, green light, the green light is also the discriminative stimulus, right? Or what we call the SD. That means it's time to run. It's time to go get closer to winning or whatever your prize is for getting to the end. So that's good. We like it when you say green light, don't we? It's a perfect example of the discriminative stimulus approach. When I've said red light or stop, and you're sitting there waiting, if you're, going along with the program, you're waiting and you're like, well, I'm kind of stuck here. I'm not making progress with anything. Now, Steve is go with green light. Cool. I really like it when he says go in green light. And you get a lot of referencing built up playing a game like that.
Awesome. Yeah. And I love how you always bring everything back to games.
As much as I can.
Yeah. I mean, that's your thing. That's if anybody wants to know how to use games to teach something, find Steve Ward. Go talk to him. He's the guy who can help you. I want to ask you something that's a little bit of an interest to me, because I think I'm expanding kind of my views on who I'm working with and how I'm able to help society in general. But do you think, or do you see there being a big difference between how ABA might be used in supporting people with autistic spectrum disorders versus using it to teach anyone anything?
very clearly, in case anyone doesn't understand it, the principles are the same, right? I know you've taught your listeners already by now, that you've had several podcasts already, that the principles are the same. We're still talking about stimulus control, red lights and green lights, and consequences of things, and all of that. So those stay the same. The part of the unique challenge of working with people on the spectrum is accounting for natural reinforcement as much as possible for the behaviors we're trying to teach. So you're using behavior analysis if you're deciding how to get the most out of factory workers, right? How can we make them the most efficient? In organizational behavior management, we have, are you paid by the unit? Are you paid by the hour? All of these kind of things. That's behavior analysis. But working with someone with autism, if we want, I'd like the example of greeting someone. We can get someone to say hi to somebody by offering them a Skittle for doing it. But that's also not the natural consequence for doing it. So what is the natural consequence for saying hi? Someone tends to look at you, they tend to say hi back, they tend to smile, right? Something like that. Maybe there's a follow-up question. Can we make that a reinforcer? How would we do that? How do we make Steve's attention a reinforcer for you? And if we can do that, then we can begin working on behaviors relevant to earning my attention. How do you say my name to get me to turn around? Things like that.
So you think, do you think that in the population of ASD, that sometimes there just needs to be more direct, specific attention paid to varied interests or differing interests?
Very much so. I think the most important, there's a lot of important things, obviously, but if I could only pick one thing to try to target for our kids, it would be establishing access to attention as a reinforcer for them, as like a really strong reinforcer.
So basically showing the value of social interactions, showing the value of people in general. What is the good thing of a relationship? And right, again, that goes back to your example of saying hi to someone. If I say hi to someone and the natural reinforcer is they'll say hi back to me, and then they'll have maybe a positive feeling about me that in some future aspect, when I meet this person, we're going to have potential positive interactions in the future. That's all great. But what if I don't like interactions with people? What if I have no desire to interact with people in the future? And so I'm actually more reinforced by grunting at someone and trying to get them to not want to come back and keep talking to me and engaging with me. Exactly. Which then brings me right back to the idea that, any child with or without a diagnosis, if all their teachers have ever done is nag them and complain and argue with them and force them to do things they don't want to do, why would you have any desire to be around people in general? Why would you not spend all of your time on a computer where you get to be in control versus society where you feel like you're never in control? And that really comes back to the importance of motivation. It brings us right back to why it is so important that we teach. Yeah. Like we're not teaching with the goal of giving you skills. We're teaching with the goal of teaching you to understand and enjoy and find value in the benefit of social interactions and other people. So it's really complicated. But do you think that there's any reason why basic ABA type knowledge and understanding and processes aren't just as valuable for parents of typical children?
The vast majority of our kids, if they're give us headaches at home some of the time, are going to probably give their teachers fewer headaches at school, as the other kids around them whose opinions they value are behaving this way, right? They start wanting to behave that way, and they're learning, by seeing what other kids are getting from what they're doing and all that. So it's still behavioral analysis, but the applications, what it actually looks like, the procedures would be different for different kinds of learners.
Yeah, good. And I think because typical children can be problematic in the way that they interact with their parents. Some can be problematic in the way that they interact with their teachers. Some can be problematic in the way that they interact in social situations. But when you are neurotypical, you tend to come from a frame of reference where there are a lot of social motivators that will, at some point in your maturity level, start to pull on your behavior.
Yeah.
That will kind of start to naturally guide you in certain directions, some more than others.
Yep.
Right. And so to some degree with typical children, you can get away with allowing things to just kind of develop as they do, because the world will kind of catch up to them. And then, but that doesn't mean you always want to have to do that, right? You don't have to always sit back and wait, through teenage years of a nightmare for your child to finally grow up and start to realize that you're not just a jerk.
Right.
So I think there's
some good examples of that is like everyone age 1 and up should hopefully be learning about boundaries at some level. Like that's one of those pivot points that you really have to get established at some level. And the better, the healthier that understanding is from the earlier the age, the better off they're going to be. Now, if we struggle to get that through to our kids and he's like 3 or 4, then we really hope they have really good teachers in kindergarten that help teach them how to manage the boundaries. If you waited until they're 15 and they have no appreciation for boundaries whatsoever, you're going to have trouble.
Yeah, and I think that's really what happens is with neurotypical individuals, we look at it really can be a community approach to education, right? The parents have their role, the kindergarten teacher has their role, the first grade school teacher has their role, the administrators have their role, the other kids in the class have their role, and we all play our roles, and it should give that child enough opportunity to experience enough positive things to allow them to kind of assimilate and figure out their way. And if a parent is not able to do their role the right way for the right reasons, you've still got that backup that maybe the school can set up a situation. And you can see a child who does really well in school, but is a nightmare at home.
Right.
Or the other way around. Sometimes it's the parents have a really great relationship with the child, and the child is really responding to the way that parent teaches. But then they get to school, and now all of a sudden everything is rigid and structured, and the child just goes off the rails because that's just not how they learn. That's just not what works for them. And so you kind of want to have all of that working. And I think when we get to kids with, kids who are atypical, then sometimes you find that you have to be a little bit more specific and in understanding some of these things in a much deeper way to truly be able to help them. So yeah, I agree. I think there definitely are differences. But I also am someone who thinks that there's a lot of families out there of kids who are not diagnosed with anything, who don't need to be diagnosed with anything, but who are not being taught boundaries, who are not learning how to be teammates in their home environment.
Yeah.
And I think that these principles that we've learned and used for years and years and years with kids who could be, extremely challenging, including aggression and self-injurious and that sort of thing, could be really beneficial to them. So I always like to get my guests' opinions on that sort of thing.
It could be as simple as, reading with your kid or to your kid in a way that they appreciate, right? You're doing that with 2-year-olds, getting a love of reading, pairing your attention with something non-judgmental. It doesn't have to sound like it's ABA, but you could look at it and analyze it like a behavior analyst if you want. Some of that is, we could have a litany of things that we see as good ABA that should be done with everybody.
Yeah. I think with my own daughters, both my daughters are mostly, they're both neurotypical. They're mostly typical children in that there's no major diagnosis. My younger daughter does have something called misophonia, but it's not a developmental delay or disability. And I find that having the knowledge of the behavioral principles and having the knowledge of, what I use, the just 7 steps approach, offers me a toolbox that I don't always pull out.
Right.
I don't walk around with my toolbox all day. It's in the garage. It's out there. It's if I need
pocket wrench, we can get it if we need it.
Right. If I need to go grab a screwdriver, I can go get a screwdriver. If I need to get a hammer, I know how to work. I know how to wield the hammer if I have to. But I'm not walking around wielding a hammer all day, and I'm not walking around trying to figure out, okay, so my child got a C plus on this test, and I needed her to get a B on this test or an A. What do I have to do to get there? Because that's not really what we want to do. And to some degree, I want to caution other behavior analysts who work with kids with disabilities, developmental disabilities, and autism, that if you're not going to do that with a typical child, is it necessarily appropriate to be doing that with a child just because they have a diagnosis of autism? Now, that child may need more support, may need more attention to detail for sure. But does it benefit those kids to have people in their lives constantly walking around swinging hammers and screwdrivers versus having that?
It doesn't benefit anyone to have the hammers around too often.
But you know what I mean? So anyway, I just think that that's a pretty interesting area. And I know that we've kind of diverged from our topic of motivation for today. If you don't mind, I may have to split this conversation into 2 episodes. So cool. You guys might get a double dose of Steve here, one week after the next.
Perfect.
This brings us to the end of part 2 of our 3-part discussion with the incredible Steve Ward. Look on the website for part 3 to see the conclusion of this discussion. Part 3 is certainly my favorite part of the interview. I know you will like it, so be sure to subscribe and join us for Motivation Part 3. This time it's personal.